Hi, well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'd like to echo my thanks to Kate and Sarah, and of course, Ashley, who made sure that I actually got here. So I'm going to take about an hour or an hour and 15-minute presentation and give it to you in about 15 minutes. So if you want to learn more, come to Grand Rounds tomorrow. It's basically this talk, but much longer. As Dr. Plow mentioned, my name is Karen Parker, and I currently serve as the director of the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office at NIH. And basically what I'm going to do today is first acknowledge the folks on the team at NIH and the Office of the Director in this office. Without these folks, nothing that I do would actually work or happen, and so I'd like to thank them. And then what I'm going to really talk about is just sort of the history of this work at NIH, so the development of our office, our current research strategic plan, some related legislation that I think is important for folks to know about, and then a little bit about looking ahead. So in terms of background, NIH just this past August updated our definition of SGM populations, and so we really did this to try to be more inclusive of the population and to make sure that folks sort of saw themselves within our work. And so this is how we currently define SGM populations, and this you can find this on our website, but I hope that this sort of indicates to you the breadth of populations for which we are very concerned in terms of the lack of research. In October of 2016, the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities also officially designated sexual and gender minority populations as a health disparity population for research at NIH. That sounds like a very sort of boring government type thing to happen, but what I have heard sort of across the board anecdotally from people at institutions all over the nation is that this was really an important thing that we did, because what it did was it really validated people's work, not just with their deans and their chairs, but also with their colleagues, right, and with folks in the community. And so we're very proud of this, and so I just want folks to know this, because this is important to know as you think about the things that are happening at NIH. So in terms of our office, we were created in 2015, and this really was a direct result of an Institute of Medicine report that came out in 2011. So in 2009, NIH commissioned the IOM to do a report on the health of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender populations. When that came out, NIH really stood up and took a look at that. We looked at the recommendations, and the NIH director, to his credit, said, you know, we need to figure out what we're doing so that we know sort of where those gaps are. And one of the first things he did was establish an LGBT coordinating committee with representation from across the NIH. So we have 27 institutes and centers, and people from across the agency came together to work on this issue. The office was something that was included within the strategic plan that coordinating committee developed, and so that strategic plan, we're sort of coming to the end of that right now, and I will talk a little more about that. But our office sits within the Division of Program Coordination, Planning, and Strategic Initiatives, lovingly referred to as DPCIPSI. That is the largest division within the Office of the Director, and so we sit there very specifically because what we didn't want to happen with this office was for it to be put into one of the institutes or centers, and then to have all the other institutes and centers say, oh, well, they've got the SGM stuff, so we don't really have to worry about it. So what we're trying to do is make sure that people at every single institute and center can start to see where are those intersections between their missions, their visions, and SGM health research. And so we very strategically sit within the Office of the Director. So what do? We do not have grant-making authority, so we cannot fund your grant. We do some co-funding, but we primarily do a lot of things like coordination. We represent NIH at events like this. We serve as a resource, and so this I think is one of the most important things that we do. I like to think of our office as a service center. So not just for NIH, but certainly we want NIH people to reach out to us when they have questions, when they need technical assistance in this work. But we also want to serve basically as a resource for the extramural community. So if there's a PI or a student who says, I don't even know where to start, NIH is so huge, start with me. You can always reach out to me first. I'm happy to make connections across the institutes and centers and to get you to the right program officer who you would need to connect with, depending on your study. We also convene conferences and workshops. So we think about how can we identify sort of key research opportunities within SGM Health, and what's the role of our office? And what we've decided is that if there's a topic within SGM Health research that could or should squarely fit with one of our institutes or centers, then they should take it on, and we would be supportive and we would collaborate. But if there's a SGM-related health issue that spans so many different disease areas or health conditions, then that's something that we would want to take on. So for example, in April of 2018, we held a workshop specifically on methods and measurement in SGM health research, because we know that impacts health research across the agency. As a result of that, we've actually just released an RFA on methods and measurement in SGM health research. We're very, very proud of that, because that was a very big lift. And then we also, for example, in September of just 2019, held a workshop on bisexual health. So that's one of those things where without our office, a workshop like that most likely would not have happened, because nobody truly felt like that belonged to them. But from people across the agency collaborated, provided financial support, and were very enthusiastic about that workshop. So we also do things like reporting. We work for the government, so there's a lot of reporting. So we take on a lot of those issues. We think about managing information dissemination, trying to get things like funding opportunity announcements that are relevant to the SGM research community out, so that people know what's happening at NIH. And then we always try to leverage our resources, because we are a small office and NIH is a big place. And so we're constantly going out to NIH to make sure that we're making the most of our resources. So how do we accomplish our goals? I mentioned the LGBT Coordinating Committee that has since been renamed to the SGM Research Coordinating Committee. That group meets once a month. Those are representatives from across the agency. I sit on so many committees. This one's the best. Tamara, who you will hear from, is on that committee. This is the most amazing group of people from NIH, people who are incredibly committed. And much like me, in 2011, I was working at the National Cancer Institute. And when this very first committee was established, I was at NCI jumping up and down screaming, "Pick me, pick me." People don't do that for committees, right? But people across the agency were jumping up and down doing the same thing. And many of those people are still on this committee. And so it's a great group of people to work with. And then we also have the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Working Group. One of those members is also here. Tonya Petit, who you will also hear from later, is one of the members of that group. And that group are extramural researchers who come to the table at least once or twice a year and provide advice to our office and our division on SGM-related health research. So now I'll quickly talk about our current research strategic plan. So it focuses on FY 2016 to FY 2020. So at the end of September of this year, this strategic plan will be finished. It does include activities from across the agency. So it's not just our office strategic plan. And I tell everybody at NIH who will listen that this plan is ours, meaning the entire agencies. But it really does kind of serve as a blueprint for our office as we think about priorities and how we want to move forward. So goal one is to expand the knowledge base. That's pretty basic, right? NIH funds research, that's what we want to do. And so we work on this goal in several ways. We try to put out funding opportunity announcements that are very specific to SGM Health, and also ones that are relevant. We also in our office have an administrative supplement program that is one of sort of our signature programs, and we work across the institutes and centers to co-fund those. And then we do other things like sign on to the methods and measurement FOA and try to work with the institutes and centers to think about how does this work fit within your research. And then goal two is to remove barriers to conducting this work. And so that's everything from us looking around at what's happening in human resources, right? What do our position descriptions at NIH look like? Are they gendered? Would this turn somebody off who might be applying for a job, either from the outside or within NIH? So we look at a lot of those kinds of things. And I will say people within the research community often contact me and say, you know, hey, this is something I noticed when I went to sign up for this conference, or this is something that happened with my ERA Commons. I understand most of you probably know what that means, with my ERA Commons account, right? So there's a lot of things, NIH is so huge that I don't know about. So if you notice something that you feel is offensive or that NIH is not doing right, call me. I'm not promising you I can fix it, but I promise you I will try to fix it. And so I'm constantly calling people at NIH to say, hey, can we meet about this issue and how can we fix this? So how can we make sure that everybody, and I mean everybody, feels like NIH is a welcoming place? So, okay, goal 3 is to strengthen the community of researchers and scholars who conduct this work. And so we think about this in 2 ways. We do want to strengthen the community of scholars conducting SGM health research, regardless of identity. But we also want to think about SGM researchers who are doing any type of science, right? So we know from a few studies and certainly anecdotally that science is not always a welcoming place for SGM populations. We certainly know that there are some major issues happening at NIH in terms of workplace climate and harassment in SGM populations. And so we know that we need to kind of work on both of those areas. A major barrier to that is data collection. And so we are trying to get better data collection about the research pool so that we can make sure that things aren't happening in terms of fairness with SGM researchers. And so we're kind of constantly thinking about what's happening here, how can we get the data, and how can we make sure that we are working alongside some of our federal partners to ensure that, you know, things aren't happening that we don't want to happen, or that we're setting things in place that will help improve the scientific environment. We also have been holding regional workshops where we have collaborated with several institutions. We come together, we invite people to a free grantspersonship workshop. Several program officers will come with me, and it's basically a day-long event where people can come, meet program officers, learn about grantspersonship, connect with researchers in the field who have sort of gone through the process and who can serve as mentors. And so our next regional workshop is April 2nd at Ohio State, if people are interested. And so those have been very, I think, successful just in terms of lifting the veil off of NIH a little bit. And then goal 4 is to evaluate progress on advancing SGM research, and we do that through a lot of our reporting. Every year we put out a portfolio analysis, and every year we put out a companion document that's an annual report. So between those 2 documents, you can get a really good sense of what NIH is doing within this space. So I mentioned our strategic plan. This is not a great slide, but it's to basically indicate that while our current strategic plan is ending, we are working very diligently on our next strategic plan, and that we're taking several steps to make sure that we're getting input from a variety of constituencies. And so we started last summer to think about how can we start collecting data basically from folks. So we internally at NIH collected data from people about where they thought our next strategic plan should head. We worked closely with our research working group and our research coordinating committee. Then we put out an RFI to the public, and so we're right now analyzing that data. And then we will be revising our draft goals and objectives and working over the next month or so to write our strategic plan. And then that will go through review with our Council of Councils and the SGM Research Working Group. And then by next September, along with our 5-year anniversary for the office, we'll be releasing our next 5-year strategic plan. So now I just want to quickly talk about some related legislation that you may or may not know about. So in December of 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act was signed into law. This was a piece of legislation. It's very large, very huge piece of legislation that primarily focused on FDA and NIH. And what people don't realize is that tucked within this like 1,000-page legislation was a tiny little specific provision related to SGM health research. And so the Public Health Service Act has since been amended because of that legislation, and it now reads that the director of NIH shall encourage efforts to improve research related to the health of sexual and gender minority populations. I cannot tell you how important this legislation has been for our office, because having something in law that basically says, yes, you should be doing this work and NIH should be supporting this work has been really critical. And so this just kind of goes to show that while we don't always know what's happening in Congress or love what they're doing, this was amazing for us, and as a federal agency really impacts what we are able to do. So looking ahead, just a couple of things that we're working on. So I mentioned the regional workshop at Ohio State. We're working on a grantspersonship webinar that would be focused on people who were doing DSD or intersex related research. I talked about our strategic plan process. We are currently kind of figuring out exactly what our next scientific workshop will be. I don't think that's actually going to happen in September. I think we might push it, but we're working with the ICs to find out from them sort of what are the most critical areas of research where you feel like we need to bring the community together and identify research opportunities. I'm sorry, that's not true. The research symposium we are having. That is where we're going to release our strategic plan, and we're going to celebrate our 5 years. The Intimate Personal Violence Scientific Workshop is the workshop we think that we're going to have next because it spans several institutes and centers, and that date is to be determined, most likely the spring of 2021.